Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Several familiar faces from our book discussion last week. But my name is Shauna. I'm with Door County Public Health, and I'm part of this project on behalf of the Door County Mental Health Focus Group. And we partnered with the Door County Civility Project to get Dr. Ryan Martin here, the anger professor, who has a couple 100,000 followers, teaching the world about how to deal with their anger, how to deal with angry people, what the norms are. And so we're going to hear more from Ryan Martin tonight.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for being here. Come on in, everybody. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm Ryan Martin, and so today I want to talk a little bit about how to deal with angry people. But I was thinking about how to sort of put this together because I guess last week I was virtually up in Sister Bay, and then I was here. I'm talking to people, and what I didn't want to do is just rehash the book again that people maybe have already read. So instead, I decided we're gonna talk about this maybe a little bit differently than I talk about in the book, but also highlighting some of those same ideas. So first of all, just a little bit about me and why I wrote this. I have been studying anger since I graduated from college in 1999, but unofficially much longer than that. I have been sort of writing about and researching, and then more recently doing videos on TikTok and Instagram about how to deal with anger. And through that, discovered that there's sort of a real need out there for people who want to learn more about how to interact with angry others, right? And I think this is driven by society right now, this interest. I think people know that we are encountering angry people early and often and trying to figure out the best ways to deal with it. So tell you a little bit about hold on. You know what? I don't know that I can. Oh, wait. Yeah, I can. Okay, we're good. So just a little bit about the plan for tonight. By the way, I do not do well just standing behind a podium, but that's where the camera is. So I'm going to stay here, but just understand I may wander off at some point.
Just click this one thing out.
Oh, okay. There we go.
And you can use the arrows to go.
Perfect. All right. So, but I actually want to start by talking about what anger is, why human beings get angry. I want to talk about how our feelings influence those around us. And how sorry. I want to talk about how our feelings influence those around us, but also how the people around us, how their feelings influence us. And then I want to talk about how some strategies that we can embrace as we navigate these social interactions. And speaking and how we're sort of building up to that last point is to understand that as human beings, when we interact with other people, we aren't just ourselves, we are also the things that we are feeling in a given moment. And the people we're interacting with are also going through their own emotional experience at that time. And those things play off each other in really, really significant ways. And so in ways that we don't really realize in the moment or oftentimes don't realize. So first, let's talk about what anger is, because I always like to start this way because I think it is a misunderstood emotion. It's something that people don't always necessarily sort of recognize. And it really starts there. Anger is an emotion. It's a feeling state. It ranges from mild frustration that you might feel when you can't find your car keys in the morning and you're running late to the intense rage you might feel when you see true injustice. And we can think of it as an emotional desire to lash out, right? It's now we don't necessarily act on that desire, but we have this urge to lash out, maybe verbally, maybe physically. Oftentimes the feeling, this is tough to talk about, but the feeling state includes a desire to harm, potentially. But we don't have to act on that, as you know. We are angry all the time without without being aggressive. And that's actually a related concept that people oftentimes misunderstand or think is anger, and that's aggression. And aggression is a behavior where there is an intent to harm. And so you can aggress physically by punching someone or kicking someone or stabbing someone. You can aggress verbally by saying things that are hurtful or hostile. You can aggress directly, where you're doing something right to a person, or indirectly, or what we oftentimes call passive aggression. And the reason this is important is that it absolutely overlaps with anger. People can get, when they are angry, are sometimes aggressive, but not most of the time. There's actually lots of things you can do when you're angry that aren't aggressive, right? There's lots of ways to express our anger, and we're gonna get to a lot of those in a little bit. The flip side is also true. Human beings aggress all the time without being angry. That anger isn't always a motivator. There are reasons why people might aggress for what we call instrumental reasons, right? To solve a problem, right? Where they use aggression or they harm someone, not because they're mad at that person, but simply because that is the solution to what, not a great solution, but the solution to the problem that they have in that moment. And so there's all sorts of reasons why human beings are aggressive that aren't necessarily driven by anger. So as an emotion, we can think of it as being more like sadness, fear, jealousy, curiosity, a host of other feeling states that we have that are driven by that are feeling states that are sort of separate from behaviors, but of course involve a bunch of behaviors. Okay, so a thing that is important to note about emotions, and that this is going to drive a lot of the rest of the talk, is that our emotions have deep evolutionary value. They are one of the ways that our brain alerts us to something. They're what psychologists sometimes refer to as like this valuable knowing system, right? It's a way that our brain tells us about our place in the universe, and our place in the world and what's going on. And so, we can think of it as like fear. One of the reasons why we feel fear is because it's alerting us to danger, and its existence in our experience is rooted in our evolutionary history, that it was valuable. Our ancestors benefited from being scared. Sadness alerts us to loss, lets us know that we have lost something that we care about. Guilt lets us know that we might have screwed up. We might have done something wrong, and encourages us to repair that mistake. And anger lets us know that we may be being mistreated, or we may be dealing with injustice, or witnessing an injustice or an unfairness. And so from that perspective, anger isn't just like an okay thing to feel, it's actively a good thing to feel. It's good for us to know that we may have experienced an injustice. It's good for us to be alerted to and energized to confront that injustice, if it is indeed a real injustice. And so it's valuable in that sense. So when it comes to the why we get mad piece of all this, it's actually a really kind of much more interesting picture than people usually think. So oftentimes people really get focused on this thing right here. Something made me mad, right? I got mad because, or it made me mad when they. And they get really fixated on this provocation, the thing that happened. And they jump right from this to this, the feelings. But there's actually a whole bunch of other stuff that happens there. I'm gonna look ahead quick and see. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens there. There's our how we interpreted that thing. There's the mood we were in at the time of that thing. There's this other sort of data that goes into informing that feeling state. So if we kind of go through each of these pieces, first we have this provocation. This is the thing that made us mad, quote unquote, right? That's what we call it. But it's really just a thing that happened that we interpreted a particular way, and that interpretation is what made us mad. So provocations tend to be things like having our goals blocked is a real common one. Injustice is a real common one. Perceptions of poor treatment is another one. These provocations, they don't necessarily have to be things that happen outside of us. They can be memories. They can actually be things that haven't happened, but we think might happen, right? And so if you've ever gotten angry because you anticipate things going poorly, you're on your way to a meeting, or you're on your way to a Thanksgiving with your family, and you think, oh, so-and-so is going to bring up politics again, and you get angry leading up to it, right? The thing hasn't even happened yet. You just decided, or you got angry based on the image, the idea. And never doubt how real that stuff is, by the way. Research has looked at the physiological effects of what they call imagined anger, meaning a situation that hasn't happened that you're just imagining, versus recollected anger, so thinking back on a time, and an actual in the moment provocation. And those imagined and recollected angers or provocations, those are just as angering, in fact, more angering sometimes than the stuff that they're actually doing in the labs to provoke people. So those are the provocations, those things that happened that we're responding to. But then there's also the mood we are in at the time of the provocation. So what am I doing? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? We know that particular states are more likely to lead to anger. So, or an anger moment. So if you're tired, right? If you're stressed, if you're hungry, right? If you've ever heard of hanger, that those states are more likely, when you're faced with this provocation, you're more likely to snap. This guy named Dr. Brad Bushman did a research study once where he had couples keep track of their blood sugar levels for a week, but then also gave them a voodoo doll that was supposed to represent their spouse. And every night before bed, they poked the voodoo doll if they felt like it. And what he found was a relationship between blood sugar levels and how often they poked their spouse, the voodoo doll. So a relationship here between their hanger and their anger. So we know that pre-anger state matters. And then finally, we have this appraisal process. And that is probably the most important part. It's how we evaluate that provocation, what it means to us, how we interpret that thing that happened. So I want to break down the appraisal piece a little bit more, because there's actually two elements here that are really critical. So when we experience anything, we make very quick decisions about what this thing means. So truly, in a split second, we decide, is this dangerous or safe, right? Is this good or bad? And then once we've had a little more time, we can evaluate it a little more fully and just, sort of reevaluate this thing. But that appraisal process can go pretty deep. And there's actually two different components here. There's what we call primary appraisal, which is when we evaluate the actually thing we're angry about, like the source, right? The provocation. This is actually when we decide, should I be mad, right? Is this bad? Is it blameworthy? Is it wrong? Is it unfair? Is it an injustice? Where we make the decisions about all those things. And that's really important, because that's where we sort of decide on some level, like, this thing that happened, is it something I should be angry about? Then the second piece is also important. It's about evaluating your ability to cope. meaning, how bad is this? Can I deal with this? You may have experienced at some point some sort of relatively minor injustice, something that happened and you thought that was unfair. They shouldn't have done that. But then as you thought about it, you thought, but it's not that big a deal. And you didn't get that angry. Maybe you got a little angry because they shouldn't have done it, but you didn't get that angry. That's fundamentally different than if you look at it and you say, this is unfair, this is an injustice, and I can't cope with it, right? It's truly, truly, truly terrible. That's a different story. And so that's that secondary appraisal where you decide, I can't deal with this, and you're much more likely to get angry. Same thing happens, by the way. We could look at this model and we could apply it by changing some of the wording here, apply it to any emotion, right? If you feel sad, it's because I wouldn't call it a provocation necessarily, but like a stimulus, right? That happened that you interpreted as being a loss. And you decided this thing is something that I should be sad about. And maybe if it's a small loss, you think, oh, that's too bad. And then you move on because you think you can cope with it. Or maybe it's a significant loss and you think this is terrible and I don't think I can cope with it. And you get really sad.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So part of this loss of a son, of a husband, someone who gets killed, that's related to you. Is that part of the model?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that becomes the stimulus. And so just like some particular things are inherently angering, meaning, and when I say inherently, I mean pretty much anyone would get angry over that particular thing. Some losses are inherently saddening, that no matter that anyone is going to get sad over that thing because it is so obviously a loss. And so the vast majority of people are going to feel that way. And the loss of a loved one is for most people, one of those. And the kind that we know, along with some other types of losses, are ones that people regularly can't recover from.
I have a sister whose son was killed. Don't know who killed him. Growing up skilled, well educated, and very successful in his business. They killed him. They never found out who did it. It's been 2 years, and so she still struggles with that.
Of course, yeah.
So where does that fit in that particular?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think I would argue that it is that part of what happens there is we're dealing with, that informs the appraisal, right? That informs how you interpret this particular loss, because in addition to all of the sadness, in addition to this is unfair and wrong, there's also a lack of understanding and wanting to know what happened and wanting to know that origin. So we can basically apply this model to any kind of emotion. And I'd also say, in reality, and this is something we'll kind of move into here as we go, it isn't this linear, right? This is a nice, easy way to unpack feelings. But the truth is, these things, like if we were to just look at this feeling of anger ends up feeding into this pre-anger state, right? And it ends up feeding into the appraisal, as does our history with the human being who may have done the thing that we're upset about, and so on. And so in reality, this model actually sort of feeds on itself in various ways. But it gives us a way to sort of unpack a particular moment that can be really helpful in understanding our feelings. So, okay. The other thing to note is that all of this is just about the feeling state. And what's missing from it is what we do or what we can do in a particular moment. And the truth is, there are ultimately like near infinite expressions of emotions, right? Yes, people do aggress when they are angry, and it makes sense to talk about that. And that is probably the most evident example of anger. But also sometimes people suppress their anger. They hold it in, right? They stifle it. Other times people assert themselves, meaning that they, instead of being aggressive, they are sort of appropriately assertive. They let people know how they're feeling. They let people know that they've been wronged and ask for what they want. Some people seek social support. They go to a friend, they go to a spouse, they go to a colleague or whatever, to talk through how they're feeling. Some people use what we call diffusion, meaning they come up with some way to try and release it through art or music or something like that. Other people avoid. It's a variation of suppression and avoidance. They just sort of try and find ways to distract themselves. So they just say, oh, I'm just not going to pay attention to this. I'm not going to talk about this. It's not so much that they're denying their anger, which you might see from suppression. It's more that they're just refusing to pay attention to it. Other people ruminate. They just keep thinking on the subject and thinking on the subject and thinking on the subject, and their brain just won't let go. When my son was about 2 years old, I was driving home from work one day, and I was thinking about my day, and I am a ruminator, and I was thinking about my day, and I was sort of going on and on. My head was spinning or whatever. All of a sudden, my son from the back seat says, "Huh?" And I said, "I didn't say anything." He said, "Yeah, you did." And then he repeated like 3 straight sentences that had just been what I thought was my internal monologue. Turns out it was an external monologue that he had. That was when I discovered that my son can read minds. This is when I discovered that I said things out loud. But so rumination is a common way that people sort of deal with and express their anger. And then there's anger control. People who hold their anger in, people who do the deep breathing, things like that. And people have styles that they tend to gravitate toward, right? They have a way that they tend to do things, but everybody's capable of doing different things on this list at different times and under different circumstances. And so there may be people who typically are suppressors who every now and then just let it go. Yeah.
Sometimes when I hold the anger, I hold it in dialogue and I blow up. How do I overcome it?
Yeah.
And Dr. Martin, someone in the chat said, please repeat questions
Yep.
when they're asked.
Yeah, I realized I didn't do that before, and so thank you. And sorry to the person in the chat. Yeah, so the question was, hey, I hold my anger in sometimes, and then I end up blowing up. And, how do I avoid doing that? And I'm going to back up and kind of explain, because part of what's happening is by holding it in, you're actually impacting this right here, right? And so you're leaving yourself angry so that when the next provocation comes along, it feels like just one more thing, right? And so the way to deal with that is to find another way other than holding it in to help keep from this sort of elevating this pre-anger state. So sometimes for people, like what the approach is for that is for people, like I said, it can be problem solving, it can be poetry, it can be taking deep breaths, it can be that assertiveness and social support seeking, things like that. So, okay. So the thing I think that's really important to understand about emotions is that despite sort of the linear way that I mapped all this out, they don't happen in a vacuum. We feel lots of things at the same time. We can feel sad at the same time we're feeling happy. It's what we call bittersweet, right? A friend gets the job we wanted and we're happy for them, but also sad because we wanted that job. We can feel a lot of things at the same time. And we also bring those feelings into the situations we face. Like day in and day out, what we are feeling does impact the people around us in lots of different ways. And so we know there's a thing that we called emotional contagion, where the thing that I'm feeling, if I start yelling and screaming and getting mad, that the people around me are more likely to get angry and yell and scream and get upset about things. And that too is rooted in our evolutionary history. Human beings are social creatures, and it benefited us to know and feel similarly to the people around us, right? If the people around me aren't scared, that means there's something to be scared of. And so it's good for me to also feel that and to operate in a similar way. And the same is true with anger. If the people around me are angry, that might mean there's an injustice that I should be angry about too. And so it's good for me to feel that. It's also part of how like kids learn emotional development, how they learn to experience and express things. They do it by watching others. And they say, I'm unfamiliar with this particular thing, but the person I'm talking to seems scared of it. So it must be scary. And then that helps keep them safe from things that are dangerous. So we bring these feelings into the situations we face, and also the people we're interacting with are bringing their own feelings into those situations. And those emotions are impacting these interactions in really, really significant ways. So what I like to do, knowing this, is encourage people to do what I call diagramming an angry incident, or any emotional incident. And so I encourage people to think about, okay, that's an activity I do in my class, is think about a time you were recently angry, a time when you got really mad, and then actually go through and map out these different elements for that experience. So what was the provocation? What were you feeling at the time of the provocation? How did you interpret it? What did it actually feel like in your body? What was that anger like for you? And how would you rank it on a scale of, say, 1 to 10, you know? And then also, what did you do? How did you handle it? How did you express it? And so the reason why I think this is valuable, I encourage people to do it for themselves. I also encourage them to do it for others. And the reason why this is valuable is it brings a lot of insight into how complicated, but also how complicated the feeling is, but also where you might be able to intervene. So what I mean by that is, if you are able to, because part of the problem is most of the time people skip all this other stuff and they think the provocation is what made me mad. And if you do that, then this is the thing you're fixated on. And that's where you think you need to intervene. I just need to fix that provocation and then I won't be mad. And that might be true sometimes, but what if part of what made you mad is how you were feeling going into that provocation? Part of what made you mad is that you were sleep deprived or you were stressed, and it made that provocation feel much worse than it actually was. Well, then that's a place for an intervention, right? That's a place that you might be able to think differently about what you can do. Or maybe it was your appraisal. Maybe it does happen. Sometimes we get angry about things that we probably shouldn't be angry about. We misinterpreted what happened, or we jumped to the worst possible conclusion about what happened. In which case, this provocation isn't necessarily the thing. Where we need to intervene is here. We need to rethink or reframe or think more accurately about the thing that happened. Or maybe all of this is just fine. We were right to be angry, and the next thing we have to do is figure out how we handle it. What do we do with that anger? Because we're right. We should be mad. But what's the next thing we do with that? Now, I also like to encourage people to diagram these angry incidents for others, meaning the person who is mad at me, maybe it makes sense for me to think about their anger from the same perspective. What is the provocation? What did I do that led to this anger? What was their mood at the time that I did this thing? And how did that influence? How did they interpret what I did? On some level, that's going to allow me to have a better sense for how to, it does two things. One, it offers an opportunity for some empathy. If I have a better sense of their full experience, then I can empathize with them in ways that I can't otherwise. But it also tells me how to intervene. If the problem is I genuinely did something wrong, well, then I know I need to repair it. If the problem is I didn't do anything wrong, they just misinterpreted, well, then I know I have to help them see the facts differently or help them understand what actually happened. If the problem is that they're just real tired, I'm out of luck because I'm not gonna encourage them to take a nap. But that is how these sorts of this sort of diagramming can help us. And again, we can do this with any feeling, right? We can think about why the person we're interacting with is sad from a much broader perspective, or jealous, or scared, or whatever. So there's a couple different strategies I go through in the book for dealing with angry people that are really tied to this model. I'm not going to go, there's 10 strategies in the book. I'm not going to go through all 10, but I'm going to talk through 3 that I think are really, really important. One I've already sort of hinted at. But the first is, what I think is sort of most critical is that people need to remember or identify their goals in the moment. What is it I want to get out of this situation? How do I want this situation to end? And I say that because a lot of times when we're mad or when someone's mad at us, we lose sight of that. We get defensive. Maybe we want to get revenge, which is a much more common thing than I think people even really acknowledge. And those things actually might interfere in the relationship more than anything. So take a moment to think about, how do I want this interaction to end? Someone's mad at me on the road and they honk at me or give me the finger or something like that. You know what? My goal in that situation is to get to work safely, right? It's not to get in a fight on the side of the road. It's definitely not to die in a car crash. It's to get to work. And so with that in mind, I should just slow down and let them go. If someone is yelling at me online and mad at me over something I said or posted online, I need to think about what my goal is. Do I want to convince them that I'm right? If so, is that realistic? Do I want to, maybe I don't want to convince them, but I want to convince anyone else reading along that I'm right. That might be more realistic. In which case I frame my response in a way that is going to sort of inform anyone reading along. That's a different goal than just what often happens, which is those devolve into sort of insulting, rants. So just remembering that goal and thinking about it and being clear about it throughout that process. Diagramming the angry incident I already kind of went through, but thinking about it from their perspective, helping you empathize with how they're feeling, which can oftentimes be really important, but also giving you a sense of what to do. How do I, is this something I need to repair? If so, how do I repair it? If not, then what else do I do? What are the things I can do? And being able to take some time to kind of diagram that incident can be a way of doing that. And then finally, what is oftentimes hardest for people, and mainly because it takes so much practice, is finding ways to kind of stay cool in the moment. Because you can't necessarily do these first 2 things unless you are feeling sort of calm and collected enough to do them. And there are all sorts of strategies here. Regrettably, all of them require practice. And I say regrettably because everybody is looking for like a quick fix on this, just tell me how. There is a way of, finding or creating a pause in the moment. This is honestly probably the hardest skill to learn, is that when you are escalated, when your brain is going and you are getting mad or getting defensive or getting scared, to be able to find that pause, to find that moment where you just can collect yourself, and then whether deep breathing, some other approach, walking away is fine. Taking a moment to like physically walk away just to regain your composure, whatever, those are really important. But finding that pause is so challenging for people. So a couple suggestions here, a couple things that I have found to be valuable. First, because ultimately it requires practice, right? That's what I'm getting at. But practicing in real life scenarios isn't great, right? It's hard to do. So 2 ways that you can deal with this. One is taking time to have an honest reflection after the fact, where you're focused on your own behavior instead of what the other person did. You can then start to ask yourself, where could I have intervened? Like where could I have found that pause? Where was the moment when I could have done things differently? And it's hard to do that because it's really easy to get defensive in those moments. It requires a lot of kind of sort of insight and willingness to be honest with yourself. But if you start to do that, you will at some point the next time, you'll start to pick up on where those points are that you can stop, collect yourself, and move on in a more calm way. And you get better and better at moving that point forward. Everybody hits a point where they calm down. It's just you get better and better at moving that point forward. The other thing is to go into situations kind of having practice in advance. We can't predict every moment that someone's going to be mad at us, but we can predict some of them, right? We know that hey, Thanksgiving is coming up, right? So, yeah, somebody is walking into some sort of altercation. We know that's happening, and so we can prepare for it, and we can plan on how we're going to handle those things. We can kind of go through the process of making those plans, deciding how we're going to handle it, and being ready for it. And that will also help us find that pause in the moment. And then that, coupled with being able to reflect on it afterwards, can help us get there. There is a reason why deep breathing is so often a go-to in these moments, almost a cliche go-to, and it's because it works. You have a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system, and they can't operate at the same time. And so what you want to have happen is your parasympathetic nervous system to kick in, your what they call rest and digest to kick in, and you want to be able to engage in deep breathing to help that kick in. And then grounding is something that a lot of people find valuable. It is just taking a moment to remember sort of where you are in your environment. And so it's taking a moment to say, I think a version I like is notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things I can't ever remember which one is I'm supposed to do. Just one you can taste, I think. Probably not multiple things I can taste in a given moment. But by taking that moment, you're just finding your sort of place in the world and kind of noticing where you're at. Yeah.
Have you heard of the STOP acronym? It's stop, take a breath, observe, and that's kind of the grounding, and then proceed or don't.
Oh, nice.
Change course if you need to.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that one.
One I came across doing a little mindfulness activity at
nice.
the ADRC.
That's great. I when I was a kid, there was a PSA that was on TV like every Saturday during cartoons that went, when you feel yourself getting tense, stop 2, 3, breathe 2, 3, think your way to sense. And it's funny because that's super cheesy, but I am now 47 and I still remember it. So it worked and it had an impact. Okay. I do want to take a moment to talk about anger online, because this is something that I know at both the 2 talks I did last week, this came up a couple times. This is something people are interested in, and I know it's really, really common. One of the things I've written about is people are now, anger is the most viral emotion there is online. We see it everywhere. And it plays, to quote one article, a non-ignorable role in conflict on the internet. That it is really the source of a lot of conflict. And it's very similar to anger in any other circumstance, but there are some things that tend to drive it a little bit more. One is the impact of anonymity, right? That people, they are either anonymous or there's a distance, right? And so they're not saying it to your face, they're typing it, and that distance impacts things. There's also an impulsivity issue that it feels consequence free, and so people can respond in these impulsive ways. The strategies that I would encourage are very similar to the ones that I would talk about for other approaches, especially the goal consideration. I think online is really, really important to stop and ask yourself why. Why am I responding? Not to say you shouldn't, but to ask yourself what the goal is. Because I think one of the reasons those things devolve, those online altercations devolve as fast as they do, is because they turn into point scoring very quickly instead of anything else, right? Instead of being an opportunity to try and like actually have a conversation about something or learn from each other or anything else. And so asking yourself why you're doing it is really important. Also, you can wait. You don't need to respond right away. I had a professor in college who didn't let us argue grades within 24 hours of getting the grade. Her policy was just, you gotta wait until the next time I see you. And the rationale was you might be, if you're arguing your grade, it's because you're angry or you're sad or you're scared. You want some of those feelings to dissipate a little bit before you have the conversation.
That was me too, Howard.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I actually think this problem in college has gotten a little worse because grades are oftentimes posted online. And then, so it's like, I see the grade and I can fire it off an email like from the grade book to the person. And so that we need the grade book to have a little alert that comes up. It's like, are you sure you want to send this? Are you really sure? So the other thing is you can have things read, right? We have to remember that tone comes across very differently in an online environment. And so taking a moment to say, hey, would you read this before I send it or before I post it or whatever, to get another perspective on how it reads to people or how it's going to come across. That is actually all I planned for today, but I did, I think I was told to leave time for questions, so I hope I've done that. And I also hope there are questions. I think I was told to leave 15 minutes. I accidentally left 17. And so I would understand if you were mad at me.
Now you know how to deal with it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so do I.
So a lot of us have read How to Deal with Angry People. How does your other book compare to that? Kind of the focus.
Yeah. So the other book is it's really more. I guess I sort of wrote these as sort of two sides of the coin, right? So how to deal with angry people is how to deal with angry people, right? When people who are mad at you, why we get mad is really a breakdown of it's that diagramming an angry incident model, but broken down in a lot of detail, along with broken into three parts. But there's a section about the consequences of anger and how those are actually a lot. Despite the fact that I argue that anger is good for us in all these different ways, it does have pretty significant consequences when not handled well. And those consequences are oftentimes misunderstood or unrecognized, right? So we know it damages relationships, but it doesn't just damage relationships because people fight. It damages relationships because a kid might be scared of their parent, or a spouse may be scared of their partner, or so even if that person is not angry at them. So the book is about kind of why we get mad, but also what are some ways that we can manage, understand that anger.
And the person asked again that you repeat the question.
Sorry. Yeah. So the question was, how does how's the book Why We Get Mad different from How to Deal with Angry People? Sorry.
You're mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about going back to your model and we've done something and it's misinterpreted.
Mhm.
And so you try to explain that and the person doesn't want to accept that.
Nope. Yep.
Where
Yeah.
do you go from there?
Yeah, so the question was, I got it this time. What do you do if you feel like it was you're dealing with somebody who's mad at you, that person it seems that they have misinterpreted what you did and you're trying to correct that, but they don't want to hear that. Yeah. I will tell you, so first of all, one of the hardest parts about writing this book, but also just one of the hardest parts about dealing with angry people is that we only get to control one of the people in this situation. And ultimately, there's a lot of nuance there. And so it does, I mean, interacting with others does mean at a certain point that we just have to accept people for who they are and accept a situation for what it is. And there may come a point in an interaction where we just have to say, it seems like we're not gonna come to an agreement here. And at that point, it's sort of, I didn't mean it the way you think I did. I am sorry that we can't come to an agreement, which I know is sort of a non-apology apology, but at the same time, I also don't think you should apologize for something if you didn't do anything wrong and you're not sorry, So I think we do end up sometimes just kind of landing on agree to disagree.
Another question about the worldviews that you talked about in the book, and it just seems to me that somebody who has a darker worldview than somebody else, is there any way to change that person's worldview? It seems like there's something that they kind of grew up with, and so how do you go about what I would consider improving that?
Yeah. So the question was about worldviews, and when someone has sort of a more grim or more negative worldview, how do you are there ways to change that, or I think improve it is another fair way of saying it. Psychologists don't like to admit this very often, but I will. I do think that as people get older, there's only so much that they can change. And it doesn't mean that they can't, it doesn't mean they can't change at all, but I do think sometimes we have to admit that there's only so much shifting. Like we spent a lifetime developing the worldview we have. To think that we're suddenly going to be able to have a new one, it is just unrealistic. Again, it can shift, right? It can shift a little bit and maybe even a lot over a long period of time, but it's going to take intentional practice. It's going to take, true effort to start to see things differently and to try and embrace a different way of thinking about things.
Wait a minute. You're picking on old people, and I'm probably the oldest one here.
I'm not picking on them, just saying, yeah.
No, but I had a question actually about the I couldn't resist putting you on the spot.
Yeah, it's all right.
Because they're young people, some young people are very, I call it stubborn, because no matter what logic you may use with them, oh God, they're gonna stand.
Yeah.
I said what I said, and I'm gonna stick by it kind of situation. And I think that that happens actually a lot with younger people. I consider young people or people any age practically. But I think what the same thing applies. Yeah. You have to accept that that's who they are, and they may or may not want to change. And I sometimes see couples where they fall in love, they get married, they have kids. First thing the wife does is try to change the man. That's what I think. Instead of accepting that he always was that way, she just has different expectations. Or goals in your terms.
Yeah. So the comment was about how there are like people at any age, and I think that's fair, sometimes get sort of locked in and get stubborn and have a hard time changing. And I think part of what, to link those two comments and questions, part of this is like people do have to also want to change in order to, like, they have to be for themselves and not for someone else. And I think you're right that like there are a lot of people who are stubborn, and that is a big part of that has to do with identity formation, how they see themselves. I think that when faced with the idea that someone wants me to change, I think one of the first things that happens is the tendency to get defensive. And I think, defensiveness is also an emotion, and we could look at it in using that same model, that if if what people are asking me to change is something that I see or to do differently is something that I see as like a real core part of my personality or part of my identity, then yeah, it's going to be awfully hard to shift that. It's going to be awfully hard. I mean, we're defensive for a reason. It's to protect ourselves. And it's going to be awfully hard to try and embrace a different way of thinking.
But I think people confuse behavior with, attitude with behavior, and that's where I think things go south is because instead of is the person, I'm talking about born couples because there's a lot of couples, and they say, well, he did change some, what do you mean some? Well, so then what they want is the attitude.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want it to find as a pretty little ribbon,
Right.
and not to say one word, to say, honey, we're just lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Right.
We have to accept the differences.
Right.
One person asked if you could show the diagram again.
Sure.
And then another person asked the question, what ideas do you recommend to stop ruminating? You get off hamster wheel of going over.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I once read this study that said that if you get a song stuck in your head, the best thing to do is to like play the actual version of that song from start to finish, and that it actually will help you deal with it. The part of the reason the part of the reason it's stuck in your head is because you can't because you want it to finish. Right. And that's part of it. So, and I've found that works for me. I would actually argue that there might be something similar going on with rumination. And that the reason you're ruminating is because you didn't get the conclusion you wanted, right? You didn't get the outcome you wanted, or you don't feel like the situation is resolved. So then the question is, okay, so it goes back to finding your goals. What will help you resolve this situation? Is there a way of finishing the song in this instance? Can you play out that even if it's not about it's not, even if you can't go back in time and redo that situation, or that situation is past and you can't address it, is there a way that you can sort of play out that scenario or kind of revisit that scenario, think through a better conclusion or make that conclusion happen? That those are ways that we can ultimately get there. If we can't, then an alternative is to embrace some sort of form of distraction, to try and come up with some other thing that you can try and focus on.
I'm going to suggest that I tend to ruminate. It's something that gets me out of it sometimes, and I'm better at it at times than others, but it's journaling. And that goes with your first suggestion, that you can write down what happened, what you wish would have happened. So you're kind of analyzing it more, and then you let it go once it's done.
Yeah, great. For people at home, just suggestion of journaling, which is a great way of dealing with that, because part of it is it helps you get to that resolution, helps you better, connect and understand that.
Doodling random lines, doing different directions.
Yeah, doodling. I think various forms of art and drawing can also be effective that way.
And there's a comment, I appreciate that you recommend starting by thinking about your goal. This is helpful in dealing with anger or any conflict situations.
Yeah, thank you for a great comment. I think that focusing on that is really important. I think it's one of the first things people lose sight of when they're really emotional, is sort of what they want to get out of this, or what they should want to get out of the situation versus sort of what they want to do in the moment.
You had a TikTok video out, or one of the social media videos, about crying when you're angry. I used to do that more. I get so frustrated that I would cry. It's been a long time since I cried out of anger, but what about that? Like, how do you or if you are dealing with 80% cries that's in the book, like, what were your tips for?
It's so interesting how somehow we started associated crying just with sadness, because human beings cry for lots and lots of different reasons, and many of them aren't just because we're sad, right? People cry when they're angry, they cry when they're touched, they cry when someone through empathy, they laugh so hard they cry, etc. I think a lot of times crying as a result of anger really is stemming from something it actually shares with sadness in this case, which is a feeling of hopelessness or helplessness. It feels like this situation is, I don't know what the resolution is. I don't know how to get out of it. I feel like I can't fix it. And it just they feel sort of powerless. So in those situations, the solution is oftentimes to sort of figure out and try and find where you do have power. What are the things you can control in this situation? What are some things that you can will help you feel less helpless? That could be problem solving. So trying to address the problem that is leading to the anger. It could be, sometimes problems are too big for you to solve those. So it could be, okay, maybe within this giant problem, there's a little thing I can do to try and help get there. That can also feel empowering in a way that helps resolve that.
One thing that I thought was really insightful in the book as well is that story you told about the son who had an angry father, and how he just kind of made a decision to spend less time.
Yeah.
He spent time with just his mom and not his dad. But can you talk a little bit about making those conscious choices?
It's so hard. Thank you. Yep. So the question is about sort of making the conscious decision to disconnect sometimes from people who are angry. It is really this is so easy in theory and so hard in practice, because these relationships, they matter to us. They matter to us for personal reasons. Sometimes they matter to us for practical reasons. And cutting off contact with someone is a really, really big deal. And so it's so funny because social media is full of people telling you don't know anything, cut off contact if they're bad for you. But in reality, it's so much more nuanced than that. It's so much more complicated than that. I think the thing that gave me some peace on that question, though, is it doesn't actually have to be the sort of all or nothing that people often think it is. Like, you can just spend less time with people. You can choose how you spend time with people. You can, and so in the case in the book, it was an angry father, and the kid said, "You know what? I'm still gonna spend time with mom. I'm still gonna go over there. When we go over there, we're gonna be a little less connected from them. We're gonna spend shorter amounts of time there, and so on." And I think once you establish that it doesn't have to be like a complete cutoff, then you can start to be thoughtful about how and when and in that case, it was like, should my kids be there and things like that. There are lots of questions that we can answer there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. One solution that we brought up at Civility, Shirley Senorigi did this quite often, is there's an app out there that you put on your device that when you're sending a message, it'll read it. So if you're sending it out, let's go to the movies, won't do it. But if it's something a little bit more testy, when you send it, it'll actually cut it back to you and say, do you really want to send this? So if you want to have a little carefulness there, that's one way you can add to that. I do want to say thank you to all of you for showing up here. We do have a lot of swag that's still available you can take with you. Just so you know, the books over there aren't swag. All right, please realize that. But anyway, we had a great help from Shauna Blackledge at the Public Health. She did a fantastic job. Thank you, Shauna, so much for doing what you've done. And then Laura Giacon, thank you for doing all the stuff you got done. I also mentioned the League of Women Voters gave us some money to help buy the books. and Novella Bookstore gave us a nonprofit discount. Now, I will say we spent about $2,800 to bring this to you. We don't ask anybody we don't charge anything for coming to these things. But if anybody at some time wants to write a donation to the Door County Civility Project, you can do so through Door County civilityproject.org or go to the Door County Community Foundation. We have all of our money run through them and they do care of our finances. So with that, again, thank you all for being here. I hope you've enjoyed this today and also a chance to read this book. And we hope to bring more things to you like it. Thank you very much.
Please stick around for refreshments if you'd like a snack, a pre-dinner cupcake or.
Thanks.
Yeah.